Hello and welcome to Fan OCC episode 10, where I take an original creature concept and recreate it using my own style and techniques. Today's concept comes from an artist by the name of Alexandra Fler Malygina from Serbia, and her concept piece is called Fish Walker. If you're interested in the type of artwork that she makes and you want to see more of it, then please check out the links below to her Instagram, YouTube, and ArtStation. Lastly, if you like what you see, then please smash the like, share with your friends, and subscribe to my channel for future videos and content. And I want to say thank you to everybody who is already supporting me. And with that said, let's get into it. So inside of ZBrush, I start off with the blockout stage. This stage is normally done at the very beginning of your sculpting of your character, and it's to block out the rough shapes of your creature design before going into any further detail later on. With this technique, I used a primitive shape technique. So what I do is I use a lot of primitive shapes to build out the silhouette and the shapes for the arms, the body, the legs, the tail. Pretty much everything is created using a primitive shape as the basis, and then sort of molded using the move brush, and then sculpted using the clay build-up brush just to get some tertiary detail onto our character so that it looks less like a primitive shaped out blocky creature. Now I'm going to run through the blockout stage fairly quickly because you've probably seen this done 100 times throughout my other videos, so it's going to be a lot shorter and a lot more condensed, this film or video, showing you the processes. So as you can see, I'm just now adding some of the extra parts, the tail, shoulders, trying to figure out where to put the shoulders as well. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll start moving on to the legs. But before we go any further, I'd just like to thank the original concept artist for letting me use her work, and that is Alexandra Fler Malygina, and you can find her ArtStation and her YouTube and other social medias links down below in the description box. You can also find the YouTube video of how she actually created this concept, and it's a kind of like a time-lapse video as well, so I'd highly recommend you go and have a look at that if you're into the 2D aspect and how she created the concept that we're using today. So returning to the ZBrush scene, and you can see here as we're blocking out the character further, I'm now just adding the eyeball to our character, and then I'll start to add the rest of the arms, the legs, and any other details that would help sell the silhouette of this creature. And it's very important to try and keep to the concept as much as possible, especially in this blockout stage where you're trying to match the silhouette to the character in the concept. So you can see just on the bottom right there is the actual concept we're using. And what right now I'm trying to do is make sure that the proportions of our character is correct before we move into the sculpting stage. And I might just also dynamesh some of the parts and do a little bit of sculpt work just to make it look less blocky and less primitive shaped. This just helps me as I develop the character further in my blockout stage. So it's very important to take your time in this blockout stage and make sure that you're 100% happy with how the silhouette looks and the sort of scale of your model is as well. This could take some time to get used to. It's not the beginning and end all. You can still adjust things later on, but it's best to try and get as close as you can in the blockout stage with your model before going further into sculpting, because you don't want to get like 75% way through and then have to change things. So but with that being said, the last things I do is just add the hands in here, and then we can sort of move on into the sculpting stage. So once we're happy with the blockout stage and we have our mesh to the scales that we want and we're ready to move forward, I'll start doing the sculpting pass or the sculpting stage, where I take parts of our model. So I split the model into separate parts, so the arms, the legs, torso, and the head. I'll still keep them separate, but I'll start to dynamesh those individual areas together and then start doing a sculpt stage or a sculpt pass. This can include using brushes such as the dam standard, the clay buildup, the move brush, the smooth brush, the standard brush, and that's about it. Maybe the trim dynamic as well, just in case I needed it. But essentially, I'll just use a handful of brushes to start sculpting the major forms and the major muscle forms of our character. And this section of the actual sculpting of your character is very important because you want to have as close to realistic anatomy as possible. This is a bit of a special occasion because our creature is a completely made up fantasy creature, but it does have somewhat of a human anatomy to it. So it was kind of like a free reign in some parts to do what I wanted, but I wanted to try and keep it within the realms of possibilities as well, or realism. So as you can see, I'm now just looking back and forth at the concept, trying to get some of those details that I missed. So right now I'm just adding the Mohican type fin on his head, and then using the knife tool, I'm cutting out some of those sort of thin areas, duplicating it and rotating it, and then sort of merging it together. To be honest, this was quite a difficult piece to do because the fin, or the sort of headdress, is quite a thin piece of geometry, and I'm not very keen to sculpting very thin pieces of material like that. So I kind of had to do some guesswork and some testing with the fin to get it looking good. And now I'm just coming back to the face and adding some more clay buildup and details to the face, because that's mostly the focal point of our character, and I really wanted to get that looking correct before going any further. So as I mentioned before, this sort of sculpting pass is very, very important to get the correct forms on our character. And as you can see, I'll start to use less and less big, bold brush moves with the clay buildup, and also I'll start to integrate the smooth brush a little more as well. But that's because I'm not trying to add too much volume to our character, because we already sort of established the volume with the blockout stage and the very first parts of the sculpting pass. But as time goes on in the sculpting pass, you'll see that I start using less and less intensity with my brush strokes, and try to get more of those forms coming out as well, muscular forms on our creature. And a great brush to use to sort of bring out some of those forms even more would be the dam standard, which you can see me using right now. I kind of use that to cut in some of those muscular forms on our character, and to give it a bit more sort of interesting look to it. You can see here I'm just using it to cut the underside. It also helps me later on decide where I'm going to put sort of certain muscle groups or details later on. And you can see I'm using the clay brush, just because the clay brush is a little softer and it's not as much deformation on the surface as the clay buildup. It's got a bit more of a softer feel to it, and it just helps build some of that sort of fleshy tones on our creature. And lastly, I'm just going to add a few extra parts that I missed out, so sort of the whiskers on the character, and then it's onto the detailing stage. So after the sculpt pass comes the detail stage, and this is achieved by merging the model together, retopoing, and then projecting all the detail onto your new clean topology. And then once you're happy with that, you can then start to subdivide and get more detail for topology for your character, which then also helps with the detailing. And the detail stage is basically going around your whole character again and adding in those muscle groups. As you can see here, I'm using the dam standard to just draw in wrinkles, muscles, and any fleshy parts to our character, just giving that little bit more detail to the overall look of our character. So right now we're not making anything that's going to break our character. We kind of passed that stage, and we're fully focused on just detailing the creature. So the detailing stage can be as long or as short as you like. I find it to be more beneficial if you actually spend a lot of time doing the detailing. Of course, there are other things that can help you with the detailing stage. If you're a little bit overwhelmed or underwhelmed by your creature, you can use alpha maps and textures from online to help you create your creature faster. But I would start to add the wrinkles first on our creature, make sure I've got everything that I like on our creature in terms of the big details, and then move into the smaller details using alpha maps that I have accumulated over time that I find works really well, especially for the concepting creatures that I do. You could probably find that you could do most of the actual fine details inside a substance if you're creating a character for game or for film. But because this is a concept piece, I tend to use alpha maps to help drive the textures on our character. As you can see now, I'm using an alpha map from one that I found online. It's kind of like a frog texture skin to help sell that this has got some sort of bumpy surface to the creature. And I'm also still very much using the concept to keep an eye on what is good to use for the creature. And it's a good idea to have a variety of alpha maps to use and to test. Don't just always go for just the first ones you find. Try testing a few out. Also try and vary the alpha maps on your character. You don't want to use the same one for everything, because then it just makes the surface of the character look a little bit boring. So definitely try to vary your model details with alpha maps. And once you've got your alpha maps down, you can then go in and detail further. I use a dam standard just to cut in some of those wrinkles that we lost through alpha map usage. I just go back in and I add some more there. And then I also have a scale brush, which I have created myself. This is an alpha that I'm using just to add some scales along the tail, just to mimic what I see in the concept. And then I just detail those ones further with the dam standard and clay brush. If you want, you can check out the links below on my online stores for the brush that I'm using, and yeah, have a go with yourself. So as we get closer to finishing off the detailing stage of the body of our character, I did have a look at the concept and I almost forgot that it was holding a little knife. So that will be in the next section, which we'll just look at very quickly on how to sculpt the little knife that he's holding and any extra details. I'll call it the extras sort of section, because there will be little extras that we might have missed out. So as mentioned, I forgot about the little knife, and so I just did exactly as I did with the body. I started with a couple of primitives, a sphere for the handle, a cube for the actual knife section, and then I just sort of scaled it up and made sure that it was the appropriate length. And then using the knife brush, I just started to cut up some very straight angles to the knife to make it look a bit more sharper. And then that's about it. The only other thing I did was create two little spheres or cylinders, and then made them the wraps at the sort of top of the hilt of the knife to make it look like the knife was sort of held together with these two little wraps. I wasn't going to spend too much time on the little knife because it was not as important as the actual model itself, the creature itself. I find that it was a cool feature, but it wasn't the main focus for when I was creating this character. And finally, I just added a few little details, some wood grain effects using the dam standard to add some of that wood grain look to the handle, and then also a few slashes on the actual knife itself to make it look like it's been used quite a bit. And that's pretty much how I created the knife. So the next stage in the sculpt will be the painting stage. That's where I just throw some really quick textures onto our model, getting it ready for the rendering of the creature. So for the texturing stage, I like to keep everything inside of ZBrush. I don't like to take it to another program and texture it and then render it out using another program. That's kind of too many programs, I feel. So I like to keep it inside of ZBrush, and I just like to throw a couple of tones onto the character just to help me later on when it comes to actually compositing inside of Photoshop. The actual texturing stage, when it comes to doing concepts like this, is not 100% important, because you can go in later on inside of Photoshop and completely change the color anyway. But this is just to help give us some of those sort of color tones and ideas on what the colors of the character will look like. It also helps with the rendering a little bit as well. You don't really want to just render a black and white all the time. You kind of want to use something with a little bit of color on it. So the brush we're using is just a standard brush. I tend to try and keep it to a very basic standard brush. Sometimes I'll add an alpha, sometimes I won't, but the majority of the time it's just a standard brush. So once you're done with the block out of your textures, so the main textures or poly paint, you can then go ahead and start using masking techniques. This is what I'm using now. I'm trying to get the in-between, the details, to add some variation of color to my model, and so it doesn't look so flat as well. So there's a myriad of ways you can do that using masking techniques inside of ZBrush. I'd highly recommend going checking that out. And then I'm just using a few other poly painting techniques to add some textures, variations, the scales as well. And after that, it's pretty much done with the texturing, and then we're going to move soon to the posing of our character. So I'll check you in 1 second. So once you're happy with the textures on your character, we can then move on to posing it. And we're going to use the posing tools inside ZBrush, in particular transpose master tools. And this is a technique used to just pose your character within ZBrush and not having to take it outside into another program and pose it using a rigging system. This one uses a masking system instead, so you mask out areas on your model, and then you pose it, and then you mask it, and then you pose it, and you just make sure that you are very careful with the masking techniques when posing. And then once you're happy with it, you can then transpose that onto your model, and then it will push those changes onto your original model and give you a pose. It's actually quite a complex way of creating a pose for your character. It's complex, and then it's also not too complex. So the only thing that I would say you'd have to look out for is masking everything that you need to mask, and unmasking everything that you don't want to mask, because even the slightest little change can break the whole pose, and it's a very tedious method. It will take some time to get used to, and you will probably spend a good hour trying to pose your character. I remember someone I used to know in the game studio that I worked for, and he was trying to pose his character, and I think he spent about a week just posing his character, making sure it was perfect in its pose. So yeah, I tend to do mine very quickly because I kind of know what I'm doing, but if you really want, you could spend a lot of time doing the posing of your character just to get it looking really good. So once I'm happy with the pose that I've created, I'll then start moving it to the rendering, and for this we're going to be using Keyshot to render. So join me in 1 second and I'll show you what I do inside a Keyshot. Hey guys, if you're interested in learning how to sculpt and composite characters, then visit my online stores for in-depth tutorials, models, brushes, and more. Just follow the links in the description box below. Also, if you enjoy this content, then please like, share, and subscribe for more videos in the future. Now, let's get back to the video. So once you're happy with your model, how it is and posed, you can then take it into the rendering stage. And for this, we're going to be using Keyshot. I came across Keyshot about a year or 2 years ago, so I'm still kind of trying to learn the ins and outs of it. But for the stuff that I create, it's quite intuitive that I know what I'm doing as it comes to rendering inside of Keyshot. And I have actually created a compositing tutorial, so if you wanted to learn more in depth on how I create characters using Keyshot for rendering, then definitely go and check that out. It's pretty intuitive though, as I said earlier. So I bring the model in, I change the materials, I add a light source, I add environment with an HDMI image, and then I sort of render out some basic passes. So you'll have your beauty, you'll have your matte one, your AO, which is ambient occlusion, reflective pass, refraction, and a sort of mask as well, so you can mask out certain areas. As you can see now, they're just coming into view, and once you're done with that, then you can take all those images you created and throw them inside of Photoshop and start compositing the image together. So join me in 1 second and I'll show you how I did that inside of Photoshop. So the final stage of this concept is taking it through compositing, and for that we're going to use a program called Photoshop. Once you're happy with your renders, you can move all your renders into Photoshop, layer them as I have on the right there, and then just start using masks to mask out certain areas of interest and light sources and all that sort of thing. For this techniques, I try to keep it basic. I don't like to use too many layers, not like my ZBrush to Photoshop videos where I tend to use a lot of layers and matte cap materials to create those images. But when it comes to the Keyshot one, I tend to just duplicate layers that are already there from the renders that I created, and then just manipulate those. So if I want more color, then I just bump up the hue and saturation on one, or the contrast or the brightness, or I'd make it less contrast and less brightness. It all depends on the type of image that I'm trying to create. So I want to try and keep it as simple as the concept was. So I added a white background and a white floor, and I made the sole focus on the actual character itself. I think it's a nice simple way to, keep it in line with the concept that I had, and it really makes the character sort of jump off the page a lot more as well. Normally, you would probably try to add a background to your character to make it look like it sits within an environment, but for this one, I just wanted to keep it really simple. So once I'm happy with the overall composite of the layers that I rendered from Keyshot, and I'm happy with how they're sitting with each other and they sort of work with each other, I'll then start using new layers and brush strokes to just bring the character more in line with the concept, as well as bringing more life to it. Because sometimes the renders can make it look a little dull, and you'll have to go in with brushes and just sort of pick out some of those interesting parts. As well as using brushes and layers, I also will use images from online to help sell the character as well. Right now I'm just brightening up the background of my character so that the foreground, he looks a bit more interesting and he sort of jumps off the page, like I said earlier. But once I'm happy with it, and I feel like I can add some more details, I'll start using textures from online, sourced from online. So that's anything from like a tree bark or real life textures, just to add to the skin. So if you find some scaly type texture on the internet, then you can actually use that on your character. So you can see here, I'm just adding a bit more detail to the actual character with a texture. And I'll just mask it out, and I won't put it all over the character. Some characters I might, but for this one, I masked in certain areas to house those key features or key textures. Again, you can layer on as many textures as you like, as long as it doesn't break the image underneath. And when I mean by break the image underneath, I mean it doesn't distract away from what you've sculpted. Again, subtlety is the key when it comes to using textures. You can go overboard, you can use too many and break the image, or you can use too few and it just doesn't help your overall image itself. I would practice using textures on your model or your concepts quite a bit. The final thing to do is to add some adjustment layers to your overall image, just to help bring in the brightness, control the contrast, the levels, and also sort of help ground all the colors together. So you can see here, I'm just doing that now. I'm playing through each adjustment layer and making sure that it helps with the image further. Now there is a section where I actually, at the end of this image, I actually went back and I adjusted it a little more so it was more in line with the green tones of our character in the concept. So what you see at the end will be the actual finished piece, but apart from that, I just want to say thank you very much to the original concept artist, Alexandra Fler Malygina, for letting me use her artwork in the concept, and I'm hoping that I didn't say her name wrong this whole time. And I also want to thank my supporters, my Patreons, and everyone else for supporting me and my artwork. And I'll hope to see you in the next episode, episode 11 of Fan OCC. So take care.